All right, before I wrap up today, got a few stories on Israel that I want to talk about. The first one is Israel has set up a office at CENTCOM. This is CENTCOM's offices are in Florida, by the way, and this is a part of the adjusting of Israel from Eurocom. So the U.S. has all these commands: Northcom, Southcom, Eurocom. A special command for joint operations that they break up different areas of the world. So there's an Africa command, there's CENTCOM, which is the Middle East, and now Israel is considered to be a part of the geographic area of CENTCOM. One of the reasons I think this is important is Israel has effectively undermined all the attempts at U.S. diplomacy, no matter how weak they have been during the Biden administration, to revive the JCPOA. And so if Israel is involved in what's happening in Central Command, they could either exploit with their knowledge or influence and steer the U.S. towards a more militarily aggressive position against either Iran or what the U.S. and Israel at least view as its allied forces in the region, whether they are actually not, but maybe carrying out attacks against Shia militias in Iraq or Syria, targeting Hezbollah or something like that. And actually, in fact, we did see this week as a potential to restart talks in Vienna to save the Iran nuclear deal. We actually just got an announcement from the U.S. Treasury that the U.S. was sanctioning two members of the IRGC and two companies tied to those two members of the IRGC. And this is going to, I guess, be a sign to Iran that the U.S. really isn't interested in diplomacy at this time. What they want is more economic warfare. But moving back on to Israel issues, Israel announced this week that they're going to build 3,000 new settler homes in the West Bank. So, of course, Palestinians can never get a building permit to even fix their homes and have to live in cages. But they're going to build a bunch of real nice apartments and homes in the West Bank, next to poor, homeless Palestinians. They will, build roads between settlements that the Palestinians aren't allowed to travel on. And what the U.S. has to say about this is, we're deeply concerned about the Israel's government's plan to advance thousands of settlement units tomorrow, Wednesday, many of them deep in the West Bank. Well, that sounds like, oh man, they're really against it. And then we say, but we're not going to change any of the billions of dollars of military aid that we give to Israel every year. We're not considering in any way changing any of the financial ties or relationships that we have. And in fact, what we give from, and this isn't the U.S. government, but the New York state government, is because Ben and Jerry's is no longer going to sell ice cream to settlers in the West Bank who are intricate parts of Israel's apartheid system against the Palestinians. They say, you know what? If you're a settler, you have to drive to Israel proper to buy your ice cream. We're not going to sell it in the West Bank settlements. And guess what? They're throwing an absolute fit, the Israel lobby, and now New York is activating its I guess they don't have anti-BDS legislation. Sorry, but anyway, even with that, they will divest from the state's pension fund $111 million in stock of Ben and Jerry's parent company Unilever. So that's something to talk about, and something very important that is happening as well. Probably the most egregious things, though, that Israel is doing to the Palestinians right now is recently naming 6 Palestinian rights organizations. Actually, to call them Palestinian rights organizations is a little bit misleading. They're human rights groups, and some of them are, just Palestinian based, but some of them are just, human rights groups. Al-Haq, Defense of Children International, and then the Palestinian branch, the Bison Center for Research and Development, the Palestinian Women's Committee for Unity, and then like an agricultural group. There's 6 of these in total. They're making these groups legal, labeling them as terrorist organizations. And basically, the best I could tell, the only thing Israel could actually say to label these groups as terrorist organizations is that they expose the Israeli war crimes committed against the Palestinians. And in doing so, people are so disgusted by the crimes that Israel is committing against Palestine, people turn against Israel. That's the best I could find, but that is, of course, the problem of the war criminals and not the problem of, the people exposing the war crimes. And so it's just another disgusting step that Israel has taken towards apartheid. But maybe the most obvious one is the destruction of the Palestinian cemetery. There was recent video I saw of what people claim to be a Palestinian mother over the grave of her son as Israeli soldiers were dragging her away, and you could see a bulldozer in the background. Now, I could not confirm myself that was a current video or that it was involved with this cemetery. So I just want to make that clear because I see a lot of people sharing that video and talking about it. Couldn't verify that was actually something that was happening right now. However, I did see people saying that definitely was a Palestinian woman and that definitely was a Palestinian cemetery. So at some point you did, and I didn't see the grave destroyed. So at some point you did at the very least have soldiers dragging a Palestinian mother off of the grave of her son. That's what you could see in that video. But what you can see here is confirmed to be Israel destroying, taking apart a cemetery that is Palestinian to build a biblical park, I think is what they're calling it. I see some people labeling it an amusement park, some people labeling as a biblical amusement park, or sometimes just a biblical park. So I don't want to mislead people if they think, that they're digging up the graves to build such flags, when really it's just going to be an arboretum with some scripture or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what's going up here, but they are destroying a Palestinian cemetery, and that's just about as horrific and nasty as you could absolutely be. And any defense of this that I've seen is just, no, it's not as bad as what they're saying. They're not going to build a Six Flags, but it's still pretty bad if you're digging up a cemetery. It's a pretty clear sign that, you are part of an apartheid state. Now, last thing I have here is a great article from Middle East Eye explaining how the population of Gaza is slowly being poisoned by their own water. Water damage studies show that 25% of the people in Gaza who get sick are being poisoned by their own polluted water. And so there's a lot of reasons for this that are outlined in the article. If you're interested, I recommend going through it. But just some of the highlights are that one of the things that happens is when Israel, say, bombs a street in Gaza City, you don't see it, but under that street, if there's any kind of like sewage piping or something like that, it gets damaged. They don't have the infrastructure or equipment to go dig it up, repair it, and everything. And so even if it's just a little bit, the sewage starts to seeps into the groundwater, poisons the groundwater. Now you have, everybody's poop and piss and everything, and everybody's drinking water. This is the situation that the people of Gaza live under because of the Israeli government. And that is just, it's absolutely horrible. There's no other way to say it. I mean, how to describe what happens to, a population that only has a few hours of power a day. So they can't run their desalination plants, their water purification plants enough. And so some little kid is drinking dirty water and, possibly then succumbing to what he has, but also even, just being sick for weeds, more stunted development, all that kind of stuff plays into effect when kids are malnourished from, constantly being ill from their drinking water. Another thing that this article highlights is some of the impact that the pandemic has had, particularly on Gaza, not necessarily in the high number of COVID cases, but just how much more crackdown that there has been on people being able to get in and out, goods getting in and out of Gaza, and just increasing the suffering. So that's what it is. You have a state with, a universal education, healthcare system, F-35s in their military. It's an absolute, you go to Tel Aviv. I haven't been to Tel Aviv, but talk to people who have been there. I've also seen pictures. Seems like a pretty modern city, right? And then just, a few, I guess, scores a mile away, you have some of the most impoverished people on the planet who can't even get clean drinking water. And that, the U.S. is more concerned about supporting and giving aid, billions of dollars of military aid for the Israelis to continue to do that to the Palestinians, rather than supporting the Palestinians and their suffering.